to Stories Beyond Borders, the podcast where culture, identity, and personal journeys come together. I'm your host, Urmi, and in each episode we sit down with voices from around the world to talk about what it means to belong, to move, to grow, and to find home. Whether you're a third culture kid, an expat, or someone redefining identity on your terms, these are your stories too. In today's episode, I'm joined by Angela Vitiello, founder of the Expat Parenting Collective, a community dedicated to supporting parents raising global citizens. Angela's expert journey began in 2010, and since then she has lived in 4 countries across 3 continents, parenting her 2 third culture kids alongside her husband in Brussels, Belgium. With almost 40 countries visited, Angela brings a truly global lens to everything she does. She's deeply passionate about experiential learning, intercultural communication, and identity development. If you ever wondered how to stay rooted while living globally or how to raise resilient kids across cultures, this episode is packed with heart, insight, and inspiration. Let's dive in. Well, welcome, Angela. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm good. You?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for coming. And as my first question, I want to ask you, what is your story?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, in 2010, I left the New York area and I moved to Seoul, South Korea. And I think initially I felt as if it was going to be just something to take the place of the fact that I had just lost my job due to the economic downturn. But it turned into a journey that turned into life. I spent 3.5 years in South Korea, and then I moved to Amsterdam. And in Amsterdam, I started my own business, and at that point met my now husband. And we got married after a few years. And in 2018, my husband got an offer for a job in Brussels, Belgium. And we moved from the Netherlands to Belgium, and I was 5 months pregnant. So as you can imagine, that has a lot of, I think there's a lot of weight just behind saying that. Moving to a different country when you're 5 months pregnant. I did not speak any more than traveler's French, so I was excited about the move. I was excited to learn a new language, and I don't think I realized really what was to come.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I really was a bit just kind of excited and so thinking about just taking it one day at a time. I really didn't know what was to come. And 5 months later, my daughter was born, and she was perfect, and I was really struggling. And I had training on different cultures and how different cultures work. So, for example, the Netherlands versus Belgium and how they present themselves. I had lots of education on just how to help others through different transitions, but I didn't envision the struggle that I had went through with everything that was to be expected in the journey of moving as a mother-to-be. I had to close down my business in the Netherlands. I had to find new doctors, and in the midst of all that, I also had to find my new self. I had to find and sort through the grief of my previous self and becoming a mom, the identity and the shifts of matrescence. But in addition to that, the shifts in identity in moving countries, the shifts in the identity of who I was at that time, and the fact that I was a business owner previously and an entrepreneur, just sifting through all of that to be able to find where I was at that time and really try to understand what was going on. And this, in hindsight, is much clearer now. But back then, it was just very much an uncomfortable feeling.
Mm-hmm. So let's go a little bit to your beginnings.
Yeah.
You said you have moved from the States to
Yeah.
Europe. So were you always
No.
in the States? No. Sorry, to Korea, to South
Yes.
Korea. That's right. Yeah. How could I miss that part? Like South Korea, we're talking about South Korea. So you moved from the States to South Korea. So were you always in the States?
Yes. I had lived in a couple different places in the States. I was born and raised in the New York City area. I had also lived in Chicago, Tampa, and I had gone abroad once to the University of Cambridge in the UK.
Okay.
So it wasn't until 2010 that I actually really left the US.
Okay. So my follow-up question is, why South Korea?
So I lost my job, as I said, as a high school history teacher. And I knew that I could very much so stay back in the US, stay in the New York area. But since I was still adjuncting, I could adjunct at like 4 different universities. This was 2010 at the time, and work at Starbucks for health insurance, or I could find a different path. And so I chose that different path. I was young and I knew that there was nothing keeping me there, and the world is a beautiful place. So I decided to just take that leap, and I did my research, safety, and a similar salary, similar quality of life, and South Korea won. So I chose South Korea, and I started in Incheon. Then I moved to Yongin, and then after that I was in Seoul. And of course, most people know Seoul, but Incheon is where the airport is, about 45 minutes from Seoul, and Yongin is about 45 minutes to an hour south of Seoul. So all within the same area, more or less.
Okay, and how many years were you in South Korea? And what was your experience with people, with language? Were you struggling? Because South Korea is like, we watch a lot of, like, I watch a lot of Korean dramas, and my dream is to go to South Korea one day. I feel like it's a completely different world, but beautiful world. Did you have any type of, I don't know, shocks? What was it like to communicate with people and so forth?
Yeah. So first off, I had moved there and I was working in a training center. So at first I was very held by a lot of other expats. But those first 3 to 6 months, there was definitely some homesickness that was present. I did have a few friends one was working at a university, another one was in the United States Air Force. And they were kind of that, I want to say, bridge between the two cultures. So I had that experience of somewhat, back home, but at the same time, the experience of being in Korea. And what was cool about the first 3 to 6 months is that not only are you cracking the code of Hangul and trying to understand what you see in front of you and what it means, because it's not that you automatically learn the language. You're not translating what it says directly to English. It has a different meaning. But in order to even communicate with taxi cab drivers or to communicate at restaurants, you need to be able to read what the menus and what the street signs and everything else. So that was pretty cool. And so was the experience of trying and immersing yourself in new things. On top of that, I want to say that once I got past the homesickness, it was really quite a cool experience. And I was there for 3.5 years. So it was quite a long time. This was back in 2010 to 2014-ish.
And then you moved to Europe.
Yes, to Amsterdam.
Yes. So, because we spoke before and you said you are based in Brussels right now. So based on this, your story, you went all through all these changes, changing countries, going through this new phase in your life of becoming a mother. So how did you tackle all these challenges, and how were you able to find yourself? Because I'm assuming also that in Europe, I don't know if you had any relatives at all that were there as a support, or if you were just alone in this whole journey completely. So how was it?
So for me, if you compare the New York area, because for those of us that are familiar with the US, New York is not the United States and the United States is not New York. But if I compare New York to South Korea as a whole, that culture shock is a bit drastic, because the ways of life in which the East are is very much based on Confucian values, based on lots of things that are very different from the way that we are in the US or the New York area. And then for me, going to Amsterdam was almost kind of like a homecoming, because the people in the Randstad, which is from Amsterdam to Rotterdam, if I generalize for places that people know, they are very direct. They're very, very similar to New Yorkers. So for me, it was such a, I felt as if like I was in a space in which I was kind of at home. There were many ways in which were different, and it took a lot of time to uncover and to discover. But at first, there wasn't any shock there. It really did feel like I came home, even though I was in Europe and not in the US. So the shock moving to Amsterdam was a lot less than the differences that I immediately saw when I moved to South Korea.
Wow, that's so interesting. I didn't know that. I really didn't know that about Amsterdam, like that. You know, it was very similar to New York in that sense, and it's very interesting to learn that about Amsterdam. And it's also interesting to say that you almost feel like you were at home. Like I would never make that type of comparison between these two cities. Like for me, they're completely opposite to each other.
Yeah. I think it really is the personality and culture of that area, because everything else, except for maybe the multiculturalism, because Amsterdam is quite diverse. Of course, you hear Dutch a lot, but you also hear a lot of other languages. Between all of those different things, it really just, maybe it was also that it felt a little bit more like home than Korea did. That could also be it too. And just that focus point at that time. But yeah. It was kind of like a warm hug.
Okay. And then you basically became a mother. You also have a second child, and you also said that you are raising two third culture kids, right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your, raising your two kids. How was it? Because they got exposed also to many worlds. How has that been?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I really love this topic. So in 2018, our daughter was born, and in 2020, our son was born. And our children are growing up in Brussels. Nor my husband nor I are Belgian. And so they are speakers of 3 different languages, and naturally, they have 3 different cultures in them. And I would honestly say that they probably connect more with Bruxellois culture or Belgian culture more than anything else. And I would say it's more Bruxellois, which is Brussels, because we are in Brussels. We're not in Flanders, we're not in Wallonia, we are very much in Brussels, and it's a different vibe. Raising third culture kids is a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it's complex at the same time. And I think in this case, for me, my experience is that raising third culture kids has so much more to do with the parents than it does with the children. You need to provide a safe space for them to ask questions. You need to know how you feel about living in the presence of having one foot in one culture, one foot in another, and one hand or both hands in a third. And that can be complex for a lot of people, because you have to think about how you feel about your home culture, how you feel about your partner's culture, and also the culture that you live in, and be able to shift and dance among the 3. And it really comes from a point of self-awareness of the parent more than anything else. Your child needs to be able to talk to you about things that they don't feel comfortable with. Because it can happen in the world, I don't know everything about Belgian culture. If my children ask me a question about something that someone said, or something that is discussed or celebrated or whatever, I, of course, naturally would have to hold the space for that. And that maybe even express, you know what, I don't know. Let's discover this together. And third culture kids continuously put themselves out there in a way in which I would say people who live in their home culture or in a culture that is something that their parents are from, they don't have to do. they continually have to be brave, and I want to say the word is resilient, in the essence that they need to be able to constantly be outside of their comfort zone. And with this feeling about home is truly a feeling, not a place, but truly a feeling of like, I feel at home among these people, or I feel at home in this location where my best friend, who I went to school with 2 years ago, lives, because she's a good friend of mine. And that's also something that I think is very interesting for parents or partners to address, because my home is not here. If I think about what naturally comes to me, my husband's home is not here, because that's not naturally what comes to him. When we go to visit family, we're going home. But for our kids, it's more of a sensation. And that's something we need to hold space for when it doesn't feel familiar to us. So for me, raising third culture kids is so much more about the parents being rooted and stable and aware and curious about their own experience in order to really hold presence and space for their kids.
Yeah. I love what you just said about home being a feeling, because I agree on that. It's about what you feel, how you feel around certain type of people. I am also third culture kid myself, and I had a different kind of experience. I do think it has to come from the parents. I know that for me, it was always like, oh, our culture is Bengali, we would be strictly Bengali, and so forth. And so I feel like I never had the space to allow myself to be Italian at home. And there was always that struggle that I felt like I was not fitting in, because there was this two worlds that were like in conflict, and I was always pulled one way, even though I wanted to go to the other way. But in reality, I also wanted to be in between and embrace both. So for me, it was very difficult. And I do love everything that you said about how you are raising your own kids, because I do think it's interesting, because your kids must see the world from a different point of view than you, right? Because they have your side, they have your partner's side, and then they have the European side of where they're living right now, of where you're living right now. So that's very, very interesting. And so I want to know a little bit about things that you do at home, like in your physical space, to embrace all these cultures. Like, what do you eat? What are the languages that you speak? Do you bring in a little bit of your partner's culture at home, your culture? Like, how do you fusion all of these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. Gosh, there's so much to say about this. So our children speak French, the community language, English, my language, and my husband's language, which is Italian. And the three of them, the kids change with them like it was almost like their nature and their DNA to be able to meander these three languages. It's so second nature to them. And our daily life is, I wouldn't say we live a very Italian life. We don't live a very Belgian life, and we don't live a very American life. We are very much just a blend of whatever it is that works for us. And what I think is really important, and it's a beautiful question that you asked, like what I see this as is like rituals, traditions, practices, habits. And if you truly are a family that is multicultural and that does have this blend, I feel it's very important that you talk about these things. And that comes from parenting to the holidays that you celebrate to everything in between. So, for example, one of the traditions that we did from the very beginning is that I speak English to the kids, even though I do speak Italian, and now I also speak French. My husband will speak Italian to the kids, unless it's a rare exception, which sometimes he'll go again the same way with him because he speaks the other two as well. And we continue that with different rituals and traditions, for example, with the essence of storytelling and the process of putting the children to bed and making sure that we read a book in our native language. Certain holidays need negotiation. And I'll put this out there. The December time period, December, January, between the three cultures, there are 3 different gift-giving holidays, which is a lot. So what we've done is we've kind of adapted different things from different cultures in small little ways. We are not big about consumerism, but we are big on incorporating the things that are important. So, for example, here in Belgium, they have what is St. Nicholas Day. It's in the beginning of December, and our children will get little small things that represent Belgian culture, which is like the little oranges and speculoos cookies, and maybe a book or something small, kind of incorporating a bit of like some Scandinavian culture too, which they give books on certain days in the December holidays, because we love to read and our children do too. And then Christmas Day, we kind of incorporate a bit of the American Christmas, but of course not to the extent of what I think is a typical American Christmas, more of a kind of drawn back version of that, simpler version, and just giving them the experience of Santa Claus, or as they would say in Italian, Babbo Natale, and just incorporating that. And then also there's the holiday in January, which is more of an Italian tradition, and exactly. And so that is kind of a similar thing to St. Nicholas for us, in which we allow them to put out the shoes and we put in some snacks and some treats, and we also give a book or maybe some small toy. But we try to keep it simple while at the same time still incorporating the rituals and the traditions and the many different things that all of these cultures would celebrate. So they still get the essence of it without us going overboard. And to be totally honest with you, if there's one thing that every parent, whether you're an expat, whether you're an immigrant, anywhere across the spectrum of where you live in the world, we need to make decisions that are best for us as parents, in which we are not overtaxing ourselves, practicing someone else's view of the world or what they think is necessary, and do what's best for us and our family. And so for us, it's allowing them to experience those 3. So when they are older, they know what they mean, they've experienced them, they've lived it, but at the same time, without stressing ourselves out, without going to beyond the limits. So keeping it within, what we think is best, but at the same time, allowing them to experience the rituals and the traditions and the experiences that represent all 3.
Yeah, and I think that's how it should be, to be honest. I think, especially because you as a parent, you have made that choice of moving to a different country, right? So you really have to acknowledge that your kids will eventually, or will want to integrate and adapt to that kind of culture. So you really have to be open of the idea that they will want to experience everything. And I love the fact that you have incorporated all these little things from all the different cultures that you have been exposed to without imposing them one culture only. And I feel like in that sense, you help them to develop a more open vision about the world, and I think it also makes it so beautiful because they can grow up and say, I was exposed to all these different things, and during Christmas we did all this, all these celebrations, and it's just so much more interesting, I would say, than just imposing your kids to follow a certain thing. Because I remember it was, for my experience, it was very different. Like it was we just follow one thing only, and we just stick to it. And I remember always being told, like, we don't follow what the other Italian peoples do. We don't celebrate Christmas. We don't do this and that. And in my mind, I never questioned it. I only questioned it later. And I was like, so what was the point of moving to Italy if I was not allowed to, do all these things that other Italian people do, you know what I mean? Like I remember with my high school friends, we would like exchange little gifts and stuff like that. But again, like it was just that, like we never had a Christmas tree at home, for instance. We never celebrated La Befana and things like that. And it wasn't because I wanted to let go of my other culture. It was just that I was open to celebrate other things as well, So I'm glad that you give your kids the permission to celebrate other things. I think it's just a beautiful thing, honestly. So I do want to ask one last question, which is about your expat parenting collective community. Tell us a little bit more about that and what you do and how people can learn more about it.
Yeah. So the Expat Parenting Collective was born out of my personal journey. I was struggling with the identity. I was struggling with how to build my community and the isolation and everything. And so at a certain point, it dawned on me, I can't be the only one who's struggling with this. I can't. And it's a business that is built on, there are many expats, there are many immigrants, there are many people who live 3 hours away from where they grew up and struggling with, how do I make this work? And so what I did was I created this business. It is based on coaching and many other holistic modalities. There's one-on-one coaching, there's group coaching, there is a 3-month program which really dives deep into the identity shifts, into the wisdom of our bodies to prevent parental burnout, to building your home away from home and parenting across cultures, and also other things like breath work, experiential learning, all of these things to help people, parents who live away from where they were brought up, in order to plant the seeds for their children to have the best life possible. And of course, you can find our website online and more information, and that's expatparentingcollective.com.
Wonderful. I will definitely put the information so people can learn more about you. And as we're approaching the end of the interview, I want to ask you one last question, which is, what is the message that you want to leave today to the people listening to the podcast?
Yeah, I think there's one main message, and that is, in the life that we live, no matter where we are on the spectrum of all the things that you talk about on your podcast, if we embrace life with curiosity and understand that curiosity is the bridge to understanding, whether it's the story that you told about, wanting to give gifts to your friends, whether it's the story that I tell about different cultures and me struggling with the identity shifts or the homesickness or how to deal with the rituals and the traditions, if we look at it through a lens of curiosity, it brings about so much softness and the approach to understand. And I think it's a beautiful thing that anyone can remember. Curiosity is the bridge to understanding. And if we approach life like that, the world would be a kinder place, a better place. And we all would be a bit more softer in the way that we approach things.
Yes, definitely. I love it. I love your message about curiosity. I couldn't agree more with that. Well, Angela, thank you so much for coming on my podcast today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Stories Beyond Borders. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a story. Until next time, keep crossing borders and telling your story.